Monster storms, killer drought, famine, rising ocean levels, and melting ice packs. Is mankind about to destroy itself? Or are the facts being buried by bad science? Tonight, a KUSI News special report. Global warming, the other side. And now, your host, Sean Coleman.
Thank you and good evening, and we're really glad you joined us tonight. You know, it's hard to distinguish between what's true and what's not. Now, much what you see on TV is great entertainment, but it's fiction. This program, however, is not fiction. It is true to the very best of my ability to determine the truth.
It's a beautiful morning.
First and foremost, I want you to know that I'm like you. I love this planet Earth. It's vital that we protect it with all we have. Clean air and clean water and preserving Earth's natural beauty, they come first and foremost to me. And I also want you to know that this telecast is not about a political point of view. Here's what it is about: scientific truth. And here's the truth as I know it to be. Our carbon footprints are not creating any significant global warming. The global warming frenzy is based on a myth, a scientific hypothesis that has gone bad. Now, I'm asking you to open up your mind for the balance of this hour to give a fair hearing to the other side of the debate. The issue is extremely important right now because, first, the Environmental Protection Agency has now classified carbon dioxide a pollutant and a health hazard. This ruling will lead to major new taxes and fees on everything from heating and air conditioning our homes and workplaces, to the price of food at the supermarket, to the cost of gas for our cars. The EPA ruling may have a major impact on your way of life. Second, the U.S. Senate will soon consider cap-and-trade legislation that will also lead to higher taxes for fossil fuel-based energy and drive up the cost for food and clothing and for our TVs and our computers, everything that's part of our lives today. Third, the United Nations continues to work toward a treaty that will tax the wealthy modern nations, particularly the United States, to benefit the third world countries. President Obama has pledged $200 billion of our tax dollars to that cause. Greenhouse gases and our carbon footprints have become a key issue with our government at the same time that the science behind the concept is crumbling. So let me try to make it clear. Our carbon footprints are from the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere to support our lifestyles. This carbon dioxide mostly comes from the burning of fossil fuels, such as gasoline in our cars, the jet fuel in the airliners we ride, the power plants that create the electricity we use for lights, TV sets, computers, air conditioning, iPods, and all the rest. Well, the theory is that this carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and as it builds up in the atmosphere and interacts with water vapor, it produces runaway global warming. The entire global warming frenzy is based on that scientific hypothesis, but the theory is being proven wrong every day. It is invalid. It has turned out to be bad science. So let me explain why it's bad science. The hypothesis is that carbon dioxide is a super powerful greenhouse gas that will cause Earth's temperature to skyrocket into an uncontrollable heat wave.
The crew here has tried to teach me how to use this contraption here, so if I don't kill myself.
Al Gore uses this chart of temperatures and carbon dioxide from the last 650,000 years to show the correlation of carbon dioxide, called CO2, and temperature. The data was produced by paleoclimatologists from ice cores drilled in the Arctic. Mr. Gore's basic point is,
when there is more carbon dioxide, the temperature gets warmer.
Mr. Gore and the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, contend that CO2 is a greenhouse gas that traps the sun's heat in our atmosphere, causing warming. And they say that our carbon footprints are created by using fossil fuels to power our advanced civilization. So burning fossil fuels releases CO2 into the atmosphere, and as the CO2 builds up, it leads to uncontrollable global warming, with all the dire consequences Mr. Gore lists in his movie. But despite Mr. Gore's big, fancy spike on that chart, which is sheer speculation and not happening as his chart predicts, he does admit,
and the relationship is actually very complicated,
and would have to be, because despite that impressive chart that requires a lift to climb, carbon dioxide is only a tiny trace gas in the atmosphere, and it would require a very complicated process for it to have much impact on our temperatures. And there's another problem with what that chart shows. Paleoclimatologist Ian Clark, one of the men behind the ice core temperature and CO2 data, shows the big problem with Mr. Gore's contention that CO2 drives temperature up.
So here we're looking at the ice core record from Vostok, and in the red we see temperature going up from early time to later time at a very key interval when we came out of a glaciation. And we see the temperature going up, and then we see the CO2 coming up. CO2 lags behind that increase. It's got an 800-year lag, so temperature is leading CO2 by 800 years. CO2 clearly cannot be causing temperature changes. It's a product of temperature. It's following temperature changes.
This is it, the basic scientific failure in the Al Gore IPCC global warming case. From ice cores to the complicated, elaborate, multi-billion-dollar research projects and computer models of the IPCC, they have totally failed to make a valid, provable case that carbon dioxide is a significant greenhouse gas. Therefore, there is no significant man-made global warming now. There hasn't been any in the past, and there is no reason to fear any significant man-made global warming in the future. I am not alone in reaching this conclusion. Let me introduce 5 scientists to you who are renowned for their views. Lord Christopher Monckton. He was the scientific advisor to former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and is now Chief Policy Advisor for SPPI, the Science and Public Policy Institute. The father of global warming debunkers, atmospheric physicist Dr. Fred Singer, a professor emeritus of the University of Virginia. Richard Lindzen, Ph.D., an atmospheric physicist and the Alfred P. Sloan Professor of Meteorology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Willie Soon, Ph.D., an astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. And Joseph DeLeo, a certified consulting meteorologist, a fellow of the American Meteorological Society, first director of meteorology at the Weather Channel, and now the founder and president of IceCap.us. I ask each of these distinguished scientists what proof they have that we should not fear the impact of CO2 on our climate.
In the period of warming between roughly 1980 and 2000, that 20 years of warming, which everybody is so excited about, which is not an unprecedented rate of warming or an unprecedented length of time of warming. It's perfectly normal. But that's the period everybody says is to do with humans. And yet, and this is in the peer-reviewed literature, 5.5 times as much warming during that period of 20 years was caused by a reduction in cloud cover, letting more of the sunlight down onto the surface of the Earth, than was caused by all of the greenhouse gases of mankind added together over that period.
It is the question of what is the cause of global warming when there is a warming. Don't forget that the climate keeps changing on its own. Without any human assistance, it warms and it cools, and it warms and it cools. And in fact, during the 20th century, from 1940 to 1975, the climate cooled. And during the 21st century, that is since the beginning of this century, for the last 10 years, there hasn't been a warming trend. So the climate doesn't behave the way in which the greenhouse models predict.
So the evidence, I think, is that while the climate is variable, there are bounds to it, and the system itself overall is quite robust.
I've been studying both the sun and the earth climate system for the past 20 years, and my concern, especially with regard to the role of carbon dioxide causing global warming and climate change, is indeed that most of the alarming aspect of carbon dioxide causing all this disastrous effect are indeed do not have any strong scientific supports.
But mainly I look at temperatures, and I look at temperatures from World War II, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at temperatures from 1947, late 40s to the late 70s, temperatures globally cooled. From 1979 to 1998, we saw a warming. Then it leveled off, and since 2001, temperatures globally have cooled again. That means in 5 of the last 7 decades, the temperatures have declined even as CO2 has risen.
If these highly educated and respected professors are correct, and I have every reason to believe that they are, then Al Gore and the UN IPCC are wrong. That's an amazing case of science gone bad. And this program will make news as we report new evidence that the primary climate centers in the United States are manipulating data. This as ClimateGate comes home to the U.S. government. Now, before we go to break, let's have some fun and test your knowledge on global warming. Heather Moore has the first of several global warming questions for you.
Thanks, John. We're going to start with a twofer for you. That's 2 questions, but they are both related. Here we go. Question number 1, global warming is real. Earth's temperature is rising. Is that true or is it false? And the next question, also a true or false question, the greenhouse effect is real. Now here's a hint. Both have the same answer. In other words, they're both true or they're both false. So here are the answers to our first questions. Both answers are true. Global warming's been going on for a long time, almost continuously for thousands of years. In fact, if global warming stops, then it is time to worry, because that may mean we are headed into another ice age. And as for the greenhouse effect, it is vital to life on Earth. It moderates temperatures. Without the greenhouse effect, the average temperature on Earth would be about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Take a little greenhouse effect anytime. Back to you, John.
The global warming advocates are certainly doing a wonderful job of getting their message out. Or are they? It's certainly all over the media, but that made me wonder, does the average person on the street really understand global warming? Do they understand how it works? Do they know what creates their carbon footprints? Do they believe that the future of planet Earth lies in the balance because of global warming? We came out on the street to sample opinions. Do you believe that global warming may doom this planet?
I don't say doom, because I think that as humans we are hopefully have enough elevation to do something about it. But I do think we are not going in the best direction if we don't.
What sort of things do you think we need to do to keep global warming from destroying our way of life and the Earth?
Well, I mean, the basic things from your recycling to just your basic picking up after your dog, I mean, to all the things that help to, I guess, affect our environment. To, like myself, my husband and I, we're vegans, so we just don't add to the footprint in that way.
What things are you doing in your life to try to prevent the Earth from hitting a doomsday because of global warming?
Well, I don't drive. I walk to public transit, which takes me to work. I try to use reusable bags. I don't use plastic bags anymore. I hope that these small steps help a little bit.
Do you think that the future of planet Earth is in the balance because of global warming?
No, there is a big hullabaloo about global warming and CO2 emissions. I definitely think that moderation is definitely probably the best policy, and a move towards greener technologies is a good thing over the long run. Maybe not something so drastic, but something gradual and something planned.
So what do we mean by carbon footprints? What does that mean?
Carbon footprint. When you say carbon footprint, to me, it means what you do and how it affects the global warming. So my carbon footprint, I can decrease or increase.
By what? Doing what?
By being conscious of how energy is used, the things that I consume, companies that I patronize that may do things that are bad for the environment.
Can you tell me what you know about global warming?
Well, I guess all I know is it's on the rise, and the reason it's on the rise is because all of us are so careless for so many centuries.
Do you believe in global warming?
Yes, I do.
And can you explain to me how it works?
Basically, there's a lot of atmospheric gases and causing more UV rays.
Well, as you just saw, people's understanding of the global warming issues and the degree of concern is quite mixed. Considering the constant barrage of news reports about the dire consequences of global warming, I think I'm surprised that more people are not more concerned. So far, we have learned that there is no proven cause and effect between our carbon footprints from the carbon dioxide our fossil fuel-powered civilization sends into the air and any significant global warming. That doesn't mean that the effort to find new power sources for our lives in the 21st century isn't a really good idea. After all, oil and gas will not last forever, and as clean burning as modern science and technology has made the internal combustion engine, it's not perfect. But it does mean that there is no immediate crisis and no need to worry about using fossil fuels as long as they last. Craig Idso is an expert on carbon dioxide, CO2. Dr. Idso is chairman of the board of the Center for the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Global Change. He joined us from Phoenix. Dr. Idso, the EPA tells us that carbon dioxide is a pollutant and is going to be harmful, and they're going to regulate it. What do you say to the EPA?
Atmospheric CO2 is certainly not a pollutant. In fact, it is going to bring many welcome benefits to the biosphere. Now, as most people learned back in their second or third grade science class, atmospheric CO2 is a basic food for plants. And as has been demonstrated in literally thousands of laboratory and field studies, the more CO2 that we put into the atmosphere, the better plants will grow.
Our automobile exhaust and our power plants are rapidly increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Isn't this going to cause global warming?
The increase in CO2, there's much debate over whether or not the increase in CO2 will cause global warming. The IPCC has their model projections that project what's going to happen 50 to 100 years from now. On the other hand, there's many skeptics of the IPCC projections that look at data, real-world observations of temperatures, sea level, glaciers, and so forth. And there's many of these skeptics that find that the real-world data just does not match with the climate alarmist projections of the models. Where we part ways with the IPCC and Al Gore and others is how much of a warming we expect will take place 50 to 100 years from now or more. Now, whereas the IPCC projects anywhere from a 4 to a 6 or 7 or 8 degrees Celsius rise in temperature, we believe that based upon real-world data, that projection is probably an order of magnitude too large.
Dr. Idso, let's say that CO2 then isn't a significant greenhouse gas. Isn't it still a good idea to rid our civilization of fossil fuels and to switch over to wind and solar energy as soon as possible?
Yeah, let me answer that question in two parts. If you're a climate alarmist, you want to reduce it because you're afraid of the climate catastrophe that it might bring. But then on the other hand, if we actually reduce the CO2 concentration, it could do great harm to our biosphere. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, literally thousands of laboratory and field studies have shown that a doubling of CO2, which we expect will occur sometime this century, will result in an average increase in plant productivity for most plants on the order of 25 to 55%. Now imagine that, just 50 to 75 years from now, a doubling of CO2 will result in crop yield increases of approximately 25 to 55%, helping to feed the population of the planet that's going to continue to grow for some time to come. Now, if we don't have that rise in CO2, we're not going to have that extra benefit for crop yields.
Thank you very much for joining us on this broadcast tonight and for all the work you're doing to try to get the science right about CO2.
Thank you, John.
Now comes the time for me to tell the story of how Al Gore came to become the spokesman for the carbon dioxide global warming scare. The worldwide global warming movement largely results from the work of Al Gore. He took the mundane scientific matter and he turned it into a major worldwide crisis. The story behind his role in the global warming movement, which has become somewhat of a religion to some environmentalist zealots, is nothing short of amazing. And it's because of Mr. Gore's key role that the issue of global warming has become so politically sensitive and divisive. Now, I hasten to acknowledge that Mr. Gore served honorably in the United States Senate and as the Vice President of the United States. And Mr. Gore received 52 million votes for President of our country. Al Gore is not a scientist, however. He learned about the concept of global warming very much by happenstance. It just happened that he took a college course covering climate and world population when he was a student at Harvard University in the early 1960s. The professor for that course was the director of the Population Studies program at Harvard, Dr. Roger Revelle. And it just happened that it was Roger Revelle who headed the Scripps Oceanographic Institute in San Diego in the 1950s. And there he did the first post-World War II research on how the burning of fossil fuels released carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, where he said it was a greenhouse gas that caused temperatures to increase. That research lit a fire among other climate researchers in the 1950s and 60s, and a bevy of other studies followed. Revelle was honored at the White House with the National Science Medal and was dubbed the father of global warming. Revelle had been instrumental in having the University of California at San Diego, UCSD, co-located with Scripps in La Jolla. It was then that he suffered a major political setback, and he was passed over for chancellor of UCSD. It was the frustration that made him move to Harvard. So it was true happenstance that brought Revelle and Gore together. Revelle said later he did not remember student Al Gore. Records show Gore earned a grade of D in the course. But this brush with Revelle had a huge impact on Gore. He talked about it in his movie.
I saw it when I was a college student because I had a professor named Roger Revelle who was the first person to propose measuring carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere.
He saw where the story was going after the first few chapters. After the first few years of data, he intuited what it meant for what was yet to come.
So there can be no doubt it was Revelle who sent Al Gore on the course that would result in his book and an Oscar-winning movie, An Inconvenient Truth, the Nobel Peace Prize, and we're told a multi-million-dollar profit. Mr. Gore was still speaking of the importance of Roger Revelle to his global warming campaign when he came to San Diego in March 2009 to receive the first Roger Revelle Award from the Scripps Institute.
As a former student, still a student, trying to learn, but still inspired by a great teacher
It may be that that article and the cautionary remarks made by Revelle at an international conference that same year were the last he ever would say on the topic. Roger Revelle died of a heart attack on July 15th of that year, 1991. If he had lived, would he be standing beside Al Gore or sitting here beside me tonight? In any case, it's very clear where Al Gore found his inspiration, and very clear that the man who inspired him had serious second thoughts about the actual impact of burning fossil fuels. Gore says the issue is settled. He has steadfastly refused to debate since 1992. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which I will shorten to IPCC as we go along, stands alongside Al Gore as a primary force in the global warming movement. However, its formation has less to do with science than even Al Gore's statements do. This is the man, Maurice Strong, the founding force behind the IPCC. While most of the world regards the United Nations as a forum to settle international disputes and strive for peace among nations, some people, and Maurice Strong perhaps most of all, think of the UN as the beginning of a one-world government. Even in 1972, in an interview with the BBC, he was speaking out to spread fear of the consequences of global warming.
I am convinced that the prophets of doom have got to be taken seriously. In other words, doomsday is a possibility.
Strong, a Canadian by birth, gave up a successful energy business to join the United Nations as an undersecretary. He organized street protests on pollution and population growth, and eventually held a major conference in Stockholm in 1972.
Stockholm, Sweden, June 12, 1972. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister of India, arrived today to address the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. She was met by the Secretary General of the conference, Mr. Maurice Strong, who escorted Mrs. Gandhi to the rostrum.
Maurice Strong had found his issue, the environment, and his threat, global warming. He got the attention of world leaders, and later that same year, the UN General Assembly made him the first executive director of the UN Environmental Program. An ambitious agenda of projects, publications, meetings, and conferences followed, all focused on the concept that our industrialized civilization is destroying the environment of Earth. Strong, like Gore, had discovered the carbon dioxide research of Roger Revelle, and that became his environmental Bible. Finally, in 1982, Strong's UN program and the World Meteorological Organization formed the IPCC. It was, and still is, an organization of bureaucrats, politicians, environmentalists, and a small contingent of scientists from universities and research institutions that are collecting large sums of grant money from global warming research that furthers the agenda of the IPCC. Every 3 years, the IPCC holds a giant international conference, always with the plan of adopting a treaty where the nations all agree to diminish their dependence on fossil fuels, and industrialized nations agree to pay the less developed nations a tax on their national carbon footprints. The IPCC does no scientific research itself. Instead, it lobbies the member governments to keep the grants flowing to those universities and research organizations. Last year, more than $4 billion, mostly from U.S. taxpayers, bought global warming research for the IPCC. This research builds on all the dire predictions from global warming. It also produced the climate models programs that were supposed to prove global warming, and the IPCC reports tout that they have done so. But alas, that's not true. Temperatures have gone into a cooling trend, and the models have failed. But there's considerable confusion about that cooling, and our U.S. government's climate centers regularly tell us that various months or years are joining the list of the warmest ever. Well, how could that be? Well, we'll present new revelations on that issue shortly. If our carbon footprints are not changing climate, well, what is? We know that the Earth shifts from ice ages to interglacial periods, and that there are smaller but important other climate shifts as well. Well, the answer seems to be that they are natural, not man-made forces, most likely related to the sun and other orbital shifts. Here are comments from some of our experts.
But when you look at the temperature changes over the time, we see cyclical changes that don't correlate with the CO2, as we've said, but correlate very well with ocean cycles and solar cycles, and those are the primary climate drivers.
And in fact, in the last 150 years, we've had 3 periods of warming very similar to those we had in 1975 to 98. Before that, we had 1860 to 1880 and 1910 to 1940. Now, those 2 previous warming periods, the warming was exactly the same rate as it was from 1975 to 1998. And so this latest warming period, which stopped in 98, is not exceptional and has nothing to do with humankind.
If you look at the temperature record, you will see that the weather, the season, the climate itself all varies on every aspect that you can imagine, actually. And it's from season to year changes, to every decades, to every 20 years, to every 50 years or so.
The latest research is zeroing in on cosmic rays from deep space, interacting with our atmosphere to create more low clouds, leading to climate change. As true scientists always say, more research is needed. What we're going to reveal a bit later is definitely information that the government doesn't want you to see. I'm not talking about national security secrets. These are climate data secrets with a major impact on, you guessed it, global warming. And when we come right back, we'll talk to an advisor to former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and see what he and several other leading scientists have learned about the science gone bad. But first, Heather Moore with our next weather question.
Thanks, John. All right, here is our next question, and this one is multiple choice. The main cause of global warming is, and I'll give you 3 choices here, A, pollution from factories and automobiles, B, orbital eccentricities of the Earth and variations in the sun's output, or C, the greenhouse effect. We're going to have the correct answer for you when we come right back. Welcome back, everybody. So we gave you 3 choices to our last question, and here's the answer. The main cause of global warming is B, orbital eccentricities of the Earth and variations in the sun's output. We have a chart that gives you a good example of that. As you can see, from about 1100 to the 1600s, the Earth experienced drastic global warming, and then it cooled in what's been called a little ice age. That was in the 16 and 1700s. By the way, as you know, there were no cars, buses, trains, or big old jet airliners back then. Just something for you to think about. John, back to you.
Al Gore and that army of well-funded, politically aligned researchers from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change are predicting climatic Armageddon. Over and over again, they tell us, our carbon footprints spell doom for planet Earth as we know it. Listen to Al Gore.
Starting in 1970, there was a precipitous drop-off in the amount and extent and thickness of the Arctic ice cap. It has diminished by 40% in 40 years. And there are now 2 major studies showing that within the next 50 to 70 years, in summertime, it will be completely gone.
Lord Christopher Monckton joins us from London, England. Hello, my lord.
Hello, John. Very nice to be with you there in the States.
Christopher Monckton, a brilliant man, I may say. He was the advisor to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher when she was Prime Minister of England. And he is a man who has made great note in the global warming battles. Over the last few years, he has earned a reputation as the ultimate speaker, debunking global warming and that myth. In December, he went to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that conference in Copenhagen, and he caused a great deal of stir there on the internet with his video reports. My lord, Al Gore says our carbon footprints are melting the polar ice caps. Is he right?
Al Gore is not right about any of this. He has an agenda which is to make a lot of money by crying wolf. But here's the facts. Let's start, shall we, with what's been happening to temperature worldwide. It's been rising for 300 years. And in fact, in the last 150 years, we've had 3 periods of warming very similar to those we had in 1975 to 98. Since 1998, we've had a decade now, more than a decade, of global cooling. Now, yes, there has been some melting of the Arctic ice cap just once in 2007 during the summer ice melt. About 25% more melted than had previously happened in the last 30 years. Beyond that, we don't know, because we didn't have satellites to tell us. In the last 3 years, that ice has recovered. 2007, it was very low. About half of the missing ice came back by the summer minimum in 2008, and all of it was back there by the summer minimum in 2009.
Lord Monckton,
yes.
There's a huge pull on our heartstrings from Al Gore and many others who say that global warming is killing those wonderful, cuddly polar bears. And I would like you to tell me
yes.
about the polar bears.
The cuddly polar bear. This is, of course, if you have a classical education, this is the argumentum ad misericordiam, the argument from pity. The polar bears are cuddly, therefore we are causing global warming and it's terrible. You only have to state the argument like that to see that there's no logic to it. There's also no fact behind it, because there are now 5 times as many polar bears on the planet as there were in the 1940s. There's been an explosion in their population. Now, let's talk about sea level. What Al Gore says is that because of the melting of Greenland and Antarctica, West Antarctica in particular, sea level is going to rise by 610 centimeters or 20 feet. When in fact the UN's climate panel, which is itself rather prone to exaggeration, says you're looking at more like 6 centimeters, which is 2.5 inches. So we have a 100-fold exaggeration by Al Gore of the amount of sea level rise.
This is what would happen to the sea level in Florida. This is what would happen to San Francisco Bay. A lot of people live in these areas. Here's Manhattan. This is the World Trade Center Memorial Site. And after the horrible events of 9/11, we said never again. But this is what would happen to Manhattan. They can measure this precisely, just as the scientists could predict precisely how much water would breach the levees in New Orleans. The area where the World Trade Center Memorial is to be located would be underwater.
Al Gore says that it's going to rise, and yet in the very year when he made the movie in which he said sea level was imminently going to rise by 20 feet, he bought a $4 million condo in San Francisco, just feet from the ocean at Fisherman's Wharf. He did not believe his own prediction.
He says that global warming, though, is going to trigger deadly epidemics of disease.
Right, here's the thing. The malaria mosquito, which chiefly thrives at the moment in the tropics, only thrives there because they don't have proper public health measures, which they now do have everywhere else in the world. Until the 1880s, for instance, malaria was endemic across nearly all of the contiguous United States of America. The largest outbreak of malaria in modern times was in the 1920s in Siberia, not exactly noted for its tropical climate. Now, why is this? Because the malaria mosquito can survive in the tropics all the way up to the North Pole if it wants.
You honor us. You are indeed one of my heroes.
Well, sir, thank you very much. You're one of mine. You are the father of weather forecasting as it is now known in the United States. And your awareness of the way that so many of your fellow scientists and meteorologists have been tampering with the data and altering it for some political agenda, which is very unpleasant and very dangerous, has been an inspiration to us all. God bless you, sir, and God bless America.
It hurts me to say this, but our nation's primary climate data agencies, part of our U.S. government, are lying to us. Joe, this is the United States government. How can they do this?
We ask ourselves that question every day.
Strong words, and I guess I better have proof. We'll show you when we come right back. But first, let's go back to Heather Moore.
Thanks, John. Here we go with our next question, and again, this one is multiple choice. The greenhouse effect, which we talked about earlier, is primarily the result of atmospheric what? And here are your three choices. A, water vapor. B, carbon dioxide. C, ozone-destroying aerosol sprays. I'm going to have the answer for you when we come right back. Okay, you've seen the question and the choices. Let's take a look at the answer. This answer is A, water vapor. More than 95% of the greenhouse effect is the result of water vapor in our Earth's atmosphere. The water vapor in the atmosphere, clouds, make almost as good a reflector as they do a thermal insulator, keeping the sun's heat out. The biggest effect is at night, when the moisture in the air helps keep the Earth's heat in. Most scientists believe the greenhouse effect causes little or no rise in daytime temperatures, and that carbon dioxide, which is a mere trace gas in the air, has only a minor greenhouse effect. John?
Temperature readings have been manipulated at the primary climate data centers in the United States in order to support the global warming agenda. Now, that's a strong new statement that's never been said on television before, but I want to emphasize it. After 1,000 hours or more of research, a computer programmer and a certified consulting meteorologist found that temperature data has been manipulated at U.S. government climate centers. The altered temperatures seem designed to support the global warming agenda. This is breaking news. The two key centers involved are the National Climate Data Center at Asheville, North Carolina, and the NASA Goddard Institute of Space Studies at Columbia University in New York City. Here's what this means. When you see a news report that the government has found that a certain month or season of the year was the warmest in history, or that 5 of the warmest years on record were in the last decade, don't believe it. Those reports are based on manipulated data. This information from the U.S. parallels what we learned in late November from the huge leak at the East Anglia University Climate Center in England. There are 4 key revelations about the U.S. data centers. First, the computer programs used at those centers to calculate world temperature averages have been dramatically altered so that the final computer product no longer averages actual temperatures from actual locations. Instead, those researchers are pulling numbers from locations which may be hundreds of miles away and applying them to that area. Secondly, the number of weather observation points has been dramatically reduced from about 6,000 to only about 1,000. Third, the vast majority of the weather stations that were eliminated were those in cooler locations at higher latitudes and elevations. And fourth, the temperatures themselves are being altered by so-called homogenization, a process that seems to always result in warmer output readings. So who are the men behind these stunning discoveries? E. Michael Smith, a computer programmer from San Jose, California, and certified consulting meteorologist Joseph DeLeo from Hudson, New Hampshire. Michael, you apparently have really discovered some significant problems with the American temperature data set, the one that our U.S. government uses to proclaim that this month or this year is the 1st or 5th warmest in all history. Are you telling me that those proclamations are based on bad data?
Yes, largely because the cold thermometers have been removed from the temperature data series.
I don't exactly understand, but I want to begin with, why did you get interested in this issue to start with?
Well, I had been looking at the global warming issue and thought it should be looked at to find out why it was happening. The more I looked, the more I found out it wasn't happening. When I looked in the data, I found a pattern of deletion of thermometers that was surprising, to say the least.
What do you mean by that?
At the peak, there were about 6,000 thermometers in the data series, and then around 1989 to 1990, it suddenly plummeted to around 1,500.
So let's clear this up now. You're talking about around the entire globe of the world, planet Earth, there were about 6,000 points where they were measuring the temperature and reporting it, and it was going into this data set.
That's correct.
And this was around 1970. And you're saying by 1990 they'd stopped taking the temperature at most of those places? You only had 1,500 left?
Well, in most of those places, someone was still measuring the temperature. You still had people in China and the United States thinking they're taking the temperature. But when that temperature measurement went to the NCDC, National Climate Data Center, they dropped it from the data set. So the Global Historic Climate data set, what everyone uses for these maps, the data flows in, but it never flows out.
So now we have data sets in the 1990s based on, let's say, 1,500 temperatures, and previous years on 6,000, and were they comparing one to the other?
Yes, the baseline...
That's apples and oranges, isn't it?
I think it's worse than apples and oranges, but that's the metaphor. They were comparing a period from 1950 to 1980 where they had thermometers in cold places with a current set of temperatures where they had deleted the thermometers from the cold places.
Now, wait a minute. Not only did they delete, but they deleted in a pattern?
Yes. So, for example, in California, in the GHCN data set, there are 4 surviving thermometers, 1 at San Francisco Airport and 3 down near LA. How do you measure the snowy Sierra Nevadas when your thermometer is on the beach in San Diego?
Or the temperature in Fresno, Bakersfield, or Death Valley?
Or any of them.
No.
They simply do not exist in the data set.
And is this true all around the world?
They exist in the baseline, but they don't exist in the current temperatures. And yes, it's true around the world. One of the more startling ones I ran into is Bolivia. There's a wonderful baseline for Bolivia, a very high mountainous country, right up until 1990 when the data ends. And if you look on the November 2009 anomaly map, you'll see a very red, rosy, hot Bolivia. How do you get a hot Bolivia when you haven't measured the temperature for 20 years?
Well, how do you?
They take the temperature from places up to 1,200 kilometers away and copy it in. They fill in with what they've got. And what they've got is the beach in Peru and the Amazon jungle.
Now, you're telling me that they've cut off temperatures, let's say the Northwest Territory, northern Canada. Have those dropped out of the data set?
There is no longer any surviving thermometer in the Northwest Territories or Yukon. Those are filled in from somewhere else, which, because there's none in the Arctic either, has to be somewhere more southerly or closer to the ocean where it's warmer.
I now turn to Joe DeLeo, and I need to tell you that Joe and I are friends and colleagues. We have a long relationship. Joe helped with my forecasting when I was on Good Morning America back in the 1970s. Then he was my director of meteorology at the Weather Channel. Joe says he was not surprised at what E. Michael Smith discovered.
Increasingly in recent years, there's been a discrepancy that's grown between the satellite assessment of global temperatures and the land-based assessment. For example, in June of this year, the national centers announced that it was the second warmest June in 130 years for the planet, while the satellite told us it was the 14th or 15th coldest year in 31 years that they've been keeping records. Obviously, both can't be true.
You're talking about points on the planet where there are thermometers, where the thermometer is read and that is put into the computer network and becomes part of the database. Those are observation stations. You're saying that around planet Earth, 6,000 of them were going into the database in the 70s, and that has been reduced by over 75% down to 1,000.
Right.
Why has that been done?
We can only surmise that it was done to show more warming because of the way it was done, country by country.
I would like, if you could, to take a U.S. state. Let's take California as an example. It has coastline, has the Central Valley, has the Big Sierra mountain range, and certainly highly diverse weather from one of those regions to the others.
In California, and in fact for the rest of the world too, they seem to have a disdain for mountains.
Are we comparing this data from this 1,000 stations with the data from the 6,000, or did they go back and recalculate all the old data?
No, unfortunately, what they've done is they did their average based on the old network, which with all its cold stations, and they're taking only the current data and comparing that to the averages from before and ensuring that you're going to find warming.
Joe, this is the United States government. How
Yes.
can they do this?
We ask ourselves that question every day. How can they do this? How can the Hadley Center do this? How can the NASA Center allow this to happen? Follow the money, I guess, is the answer.
Are you saying to us that if we hear a pronouncement from the National Data Climate Center, from the National Weather Service, from NOAA, all part of our United States federal government, that 2009 was, let's say, the 5th warmest year in history or something of that sort, that it is based on manipulated data?
Absolutely.
Now, about this homogenization manipulation, in order to supposedly adjust for new thermometers and other changes in the observation points, the data center has come up with a formula to adjust the output temperatures. But Smith and DeLeo's examination shows that that always seems to produce a warming effect. Let me show you the chart for Davis, California, for example. It covers from 1850 to today. Now, the blue line is the actual temperature measurements, and there are lots of ups and downs over the years, but the average temperature remains about the same. But the red line, the adjusted temperatures from the National Data Climate Center, it shows a warming of 8 degrees Fahrenheit over the same period. For those of you who wish to be scientifically informed, Joe DeLeo has prepared a report with charts and graphs and a full analysis of this new information about the manipulative processes at these key U.S. climate data centers. Here's the link to that report on the internet. A media news release on this huge development in the climate change debate has been prepared and distributed to key sources around the country and world. It will make news. And a key global warming group in Washington, the Science and Public Policy Institute, is preparing documents to take this matter before the U.S. Congress. As shocking as this manipulation is, it's not the first to surface. The emails leaked or hacked from the East Anglia Climate Center in England showed extensive similar efforts to make the data show warming where none existed. And back in 1999, a research meteorologist named Michael Mann produced this chart showing temperatures holding steady from the year 1000 to about 1980, and then suddenly skyrocketing. The chart line is said to resemble a hockey stick. But then 2 researchers looked into the program Dr. Mann used and discovered his computer program would produce a hockey stick no matter what data was in the input. That scientist, Michael Mann, now on the faculty at Penn State University, surfaced in November in ClimateGate. One of his emails talked about what he did to hide the decline in some of his earlier research. That inspired the talented men at the Minnesotans for Global Warming to create a clever parody, starting with Professor Mann.
Michael Mann thinks he's so smart, totally inventing the hockey stick chart, ignoring the snow and the cold in a downward line. Hide the decline.
While we listen to this, on the bottom of your screen we'll show you where you can investigate further.
ClimateGate, I think you have sealed your fate. I hope you do a lot of time, 'cause what you did was such a crime. Hide the decline. Hide the decline. Hide the decline.
I hope you'll agree it's been an entertaining and informative hour. Well, I have some closing thoughts when we come right back. But first, one more time to Heather Moore.
Okay, John, here is our final question. This one is a true-false question. Carbon dioxide from coal-fired power plants damages forests. Now, we've talked about this during the past hour, so I'm thinking we'll all get this one right. I'll have your answer when we come right back. It is time now to answer our final question tonight. The answer is false. Carbon dioxide from coal-fired power plants is not damaging the Earth's forests. In fact, plants and trees need carbon dioxide to survive. This chart does a good job of illustrating how it works. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, to trees, grass, and plants is like oxygen to humans and animals. While we exhale CO2, trees, grass, and plants use it for photosynthesis, which helps them grow and release the oxygen that we need to breathe. Seems like a perfect circle there. John, back to you.
30,000 scientists have now signed that petition that debunks global warming. And tonight, we have brought that ClimateGate scandal right into the United States. We have revealed how a computer software programmer and a certified consulting meteorologist have unwoven the complex manipulations of data at the primary U.S. climate centers. We scientists who have known all along that Al Gore and the IPCC are dead wrong about our carbon footprints and carbon dioxide and global warming are not surprised by these revelations. We'll keep battling until the truth wins. Truth and real science. That's all that we want. I know the situation I am in. It's like David battling Goliath. There is enormous wealth and power on the other side. Government is actually squaring off against us. Well, at least we have truth on our side. In closing, I'm going to take you to Minnesota, where it is very snowy and bitter cold this January. And the people there, they wish Al Gore were right. They could certainly use some of that global warming.
If we had some global warming, if we had some global warming, it wouldn't be 20 below, it wouldn't be 20 below. If we had some global warming, if we had some global warming, I wouldn't be shoveling snow, I wouldn't be shoveling that blasted snow. If we had some global warming, if we had some global warming, I wouldn't have to drive this giant truck. Maybe I could drive a little commuter car. If we had some global warming, I'd set the flamingo free.